My name is Jo. At the moment, I'm working at Dental Health Services Victoria. But today, I am here representing women in design, migrants, political refugees, children of single parents, and rainbow families. So, I have many hats. I'd like to begin by having an acknowledgement of country. We're meeting here today on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, and I'd like to pay my respects to the leaders past, present, and emerging here with us today. I'd also like to do an acknowledgement of context, which is essentially a moment to think about where we are as a human race. We are having unprecedented impact on the world around us. And unless we do something about it soon, really soon, the generations after us are not going to have lives as good as we have. One of the best quotes that I've managed to find around this is, strangely enough, from Paul Pullman from Unilever. And essentially, the issues we face are so gigantic that we can't keep doing things the way we're doing them. We need to invite other people in. Which is kind of where I think co-design comes into play. So co-design has been a word that's been thrown around a lot. It's what I reckon could be or might be part of the solution to all of our big problems. But it's also kind of so strange and unusual. It has so many ways it can work that essentially it is kind of the Swiss Army knife of the design world. So how I define co-design is it's inclusive problem solving. And inclusive is the biggest term there. It's a collaborative approach where people with lived experience, service providers, and experts work together to identify and create new things. I'm not sure how many of you have seen this definition, but I think it fits really well. Okay, so now I'm going to go into 4 things that you may or may not know about co-design, because I find myself ranting about this all the time. The first thing is, co-design is by no means new. It's actually been around since 1971. And in fact, some of the people, like Susan Berdka from, where is she from? She's kind of from Denmark, Norway, and just generally everywhere in that area. she's still practicing today. So she's got over 46 years of experience co-designing with people. It started in the shipyards in Scandinavia, and essentially it was a collaborative process where people, they brought together the government, unions, people who made ships, people who designed ships, and they worked together to figure out how the future was going to be different due to computerization. Co-design also has many, many names. The more I dig, the more names there are. So co-creation is an umbrella term that covers co-design, co-production, and co-futuring. But co-design finds itself in a lot of generative methods. There's evidence-based co-design, applied ethnography, and if you really want to get into it, there's humanistic phenomenology, which is a good one to throw out there if you want to feel super important. But the big thing about co-design is, because it has so many names, the evidence behind it is far greater than what you might be able to find. Especially in community development and humanitarian aid, this has been happening for over 50 years. Dun, dun, dun. The big thing about co-design, and especially the part that I'm interested in, which is the evidence-based co-design, is it's about partnering and respect, which is a funny thing to talk about when designing, but that's kind of the fundamentals. And especially where I find myself now in kind of the medical sector, sometimes we find that the only way we get feedback from our patients is through them complaining, which is as far away from evidence-based co-design as you can actually get. So I find a lot at the moment, what we find is we bring in participants, we bring in people to come collaborate with us, but all we're letting them do is talk, and none of it really gets much further than that, where evidence-based co-design is all about getting towards implementing what they tell us to do. One of the factors that I think co-design also has in it that it's really important is you actually have to make something. So if you're sitting around talking, that's probably more of a focus group than a co-design session. So I'm going to do a bit of a time for self-reflection. So I'm going to ask you all to have a moment and just reflect on a project that has been called co-design in the past. So have a think about it. So who was involved? What were you trying to solve? How did it work? Okay. You got something? Okay. This is going to be like a Dolly Doctor quiz where all the answers are wrong. So I guess my question is, in that team or in that project, did you have a diverse group of people with different backgrounds, knowledge and skills? Did you work cooperatively and creatively together throughout the process? Did you explore or envision ideas jointly? Did you make or discuss stories? And my favorite, did you tinker with mock-ups or make any prototypes? So if you have not answered yes for all of those, I'm going to call this and say you did not do any co-design here. But to open it up even further, is it us that should be assessing whether or not something is actually co-design? Should it not be our participants that tell us whether or not they felt that they were heard? So at the moment, I think what I'm going to do is at the end of each of my sessions, actually ask my participants for feedback and ask them if they thought they were heard, whether they think they will have influence, whether or not they got anything out of participating. If an NPS, of course, would they recommend me to a friend? And then finally, if they think it was co-design. I think we need to keep each other honest about this sort of stuff, because the worst thing you can think of is we start using a word like co-design, which has a rich practice and can actually help people collaborate across fields and disciplines, and actually dilute it to a point where it has no meaning at all. So here are a few things to think about. So 4 things to think about moving forward, as told by someone who's tried. The biggest thing about co-design that I can think of is to make it all safe and inclusive. And actually what that means is safe to talk about difficult things, but also inclusive as in accessible. So how do you create an ice-breaking activity for people who can't see? Or how do you make a workshop fun and engaging for people of all sorts of abilities? So most recently I've been working on a tactile toolkit to use as an icebreaker, and it means that all sorts of people, for that first activity, we can all have a conversation and we can participate. And I continue to refine this with different people and different groups. One of my biggest bugbears, essentially around just research, but especially co-design, is consent forms. I know they're not a sexy thing, but if you're not getting informed consent from the very beginning, how can you possibly be co-designing? You're essentially exploiting your participants. So giving them informed consent is one of the biggest things to making it inclusive, telling them what to expect and getting their permission. The second thing is finding ways to share the power. And I think the biggest thing there is often when you're co-designing and you're doing proper co-design, there are people who have been experts forever. They've gone to school, they've studied for 7 years, they've got multiple certificates, they might have a PhD, they've written articles, they've got a medal. And then you've got a person who's just been homeless for 6 years. Who's the expert? Who is the person in the room who should be heard? Some people have been talking for a really long time, but some people have just that lived experience that we want to get out. So you have to shift the power and share it among the group. So one of my favourite tools is actually simple things like this fun-o-meter trademarked by Joe. So essentially, this was a simple tool which we used when I was at ABC to describe how fun certain activities were in a family setting. So firstly, you just got this random thing with a dial, and you would put your own indicator of what fun was. So you created your own scale. That was step one. But then we'd be talking about activities that the family would do together, and then they would all vote. So the good thing about having kind of tools like this and creating circumstances for personal reflection as well as comparison is that even a 4-year-old child could participate in this activity. They could tell me how fun it was to watch monster trucks, and he could compare it to his sister, his mother, or his grandmother. So creating these sorts of tools is an important part of being a co-designer. This is a tricky one, especially if you're in consulting, is giving your co-design project a future. So real co-design actually takes a lot of time because you're asking a lot from your participants and you're building trust with them as you go. And the worst possible outcome is you fly in, you run a workshop, you suck all their ideas out, you run away, you make a pretty presentation, and then it dies in a report forever. So I think the big thing is to really talk to your clients and to really talk about what the future of the project is before you even think about doing co-design. Because especially when working with vulnerable cohorts or talking about difficult stories, the last thing you want is that feeling that this is not valuable, that we are not taking their experience seriously. So this is one from today, hat tip. I think this was a good example of a project that kind of continues. So we were working with Veterans Affairs, the Veterans branch in DPC, and we continue to talk to the people involved and our workshop participants well after the workshop is over. Another way to continue that is essentially to kind of keep engaging them in research and keep engaging them in creating their own tools to explore their community. One of the biggest things I can see in the future is the rise of things like co-production. So co-production being implementing the service along with people with lived experience. So how that would work would be that you run a workshop, you create a team, and then together with that team you continue to create like a working group in order to implement the designs and the prototypes that you'd come up with. The interesting thing about that is, especially in the UK, there's a big push by the NHS for co-production. And what that actually they're discussing is who owns the IP and who gets paid for co-producing designs, which is pretty exciting. For me at the moment, I still try to give back value to all of my participants. So that could be as small as teaching them a tool or teaching them a technique during the thing, or explaining what I'm doing so clearly that they can explain it to others. But where I can, I would love to keep kind of publishing and creating a repository of how I do things so that other people can try as well. So I guess the big thing is being a co-designer, you have like very limited control over what happens. All you can do is create the circumstances around things. You're kind of like trying to make a recipe, but all you've got is the ingredients, I reckon. And so you have to kind of swap your control for curiosity and let all of your participants figure out what they want to do. So I guess the biggest thing I find that there is a big difference between human-centered design and co-design. So as a human-centered designer, I'm still asking, what do you want me to make for you? Tell me what you want. Whereas in co-design, it's like, teach me what you need and I'll help you help yourself. So I'm going to finish up with another acknowledgement of context. We are in an unprecedented time of change, and what humanity does in the next decade will determine what happens to us all. So it's really time to start trying new things and trying new approaches so that we can solve bigger problems than we can on our own. We need to get from just listening and responding to a place of radical collaboration. And if you have time today, I have launched a survey to question you all about what you would like from co-design tools. Fill it out, let me know, get in touch, and maybe we can build something together. Thank you.